Imagine you are standing in a freezing field 10,000 years ago. The wind is howling. Your crops have failed. You are starving. Next to you is a wild, unpredictable animal, a cow, or maybe a goat. The logical thing to do is to kill it for meat. That gives you food for a few days, but instead, someone decided to do something completely bizarre. They decided to squeeze the underside of this animal and drink the white liquid that came out. Today, you probably pour milk into your morning coffee without a second thought. You buy it in neat little cartons at the grocery store. It is completely normal. But for our ancient ancestors, drinking the milk of another species was not just weird. It was actually dangerous. So why did we do it? How did a genetic mutation meant only for human babies turn a toxic liquid into the ultimate survival superfood for humanity? Think about how biology works for every other mammal on Earth. A baby cow drinks cow milk. A baby cat drinks cat milk. A baby human drinks human milk. This is the natural order of things. Milk is a specialized formula designed by evolution to help infants grow. It is full of fats, proteins, and a specific type of sugar called lactose. To digest this milk sugar, infants produce an enzyme called lactase. But in the natural world, weaning is a hard stop. Once a mammal grows up, the mother stops producing milk, and the offspring stops producing the lactase enzyme. The switch is flipped off, the gene shuts down. Because why would an adult body waste energy making an enzyme for a food it will never eat again? For the vast majority of human history, we were exactly the same. We grew up, we stopped making lactase, and we lost the ability to digest milk. So what happens if an adult without that enzyme drinks a large bowl of fresh cow milk? It is not pretty. The lactose sugar passes undigested into the gut. Bacteria in the colon throw a massive party. They ferment the sugar. This produces massive amounts of gas. It draws water into the intestines. The result is severe bloating, terrible stomach cramps, and explosive diarrhea. In the modern world, being lactose intolerant is mostly just inconvenient. You might have to buy a special kind of milk or take a pill. But in the ancient world, especially during a brutal winter, severe diarrhea was a death sentence. You would lose water rapidly. You would lose electrolytes. You would dehydrate and die. So fresh milk was essentially a toxic laxative to early human adults. The idea of drinking it was completely absurd. It went against biology. It went against common sense. About 11,000 years ago, human life changed drastically. We stopped wandering and started settling down. We invented farming. We started taming wild animals like sheep, goats, and eventually cattle. At first, we did not keep these animals for their milk. We kept them for meat, we kept them for their skins and their bones. They were walking pantries, but farming was a very risky business. When you rely on a few specific crops, you put all your chances of survival in one basket. If there was a drought, the crops died. If it rained too much, the crops rotted. If insects swarmed, the fields were destroyed. Famines were common. Starvation was a constant shadow over these early settlements. In these desperate times, people had to look for any available calories to stay alive. Now imagine looking at a herd of goats or cows. You could slaughter them. But if you kill your herd, you eat well for a week, and then you have nothing left. You lose your wealth, you lose your future security. But if you watch these animals, you see they are turning wild grass into food. Grass is something you cannot eat. Your human stomach cannot process it, but the cow can. And the cow turns that useless grass into rich, calorie-dense milk for its calf. The temptation to steal some of that milk must have been overwhelming. It was a renewable resource. You could take some milk today and the animal would still be there tomorrow. So starving people tried it, and as we know, they got violently sick. It was a desperate gamble, a choice between starving to death or dehydrating from sickness. But humans are incredible problem solvers. Our ancestors realized they could not drink the milk fresh. It made them too sick. But they also noticed something interesting about milk. If you leave it out in the warm air, it changes, it sours, It clumps up. To modern eyes, spoiled milk is disgusting. But to a starving ancient farmer, it was an experiment waiting to happen. People figured out how to control this spoiling process. They invented fermentation. They realized that if you store milk in animal stomachs or warm clay pots, natural bacteria from the environment get to work. These good bacteria eat the lactose sugar. They turn it into lactic acid. This makes the milk sour, which stops bad, deadly bacteria from growing. And more importantly, it drastically lowers the lactose content. The milk separates into solid curds and watery whey. If you press the liquid out of the curds, you get cheese. If you let it ferment a certain way, you get yogurt. This was one of the greatest technological breakthroughs in human history. It was the cheese cheat code. By processing the milk, our ancestors manually removed the toxic lactose sugar. They turned an indigestible liquid into a solid, high-calorie food that could be stored for months. We actually have physical evidence of this. Archaeologists have found fragments of ancient pottery in places like modern-day Poland and Turkey. These clay pots are over 8,000 years old. When scientists analyzed the tiny pores in the clay, they found microscopic traces of dairy fat. But not just fresh milk. They found evidence of heating and intense processing. These ancient pots were primitive cheese strainers. So for thousands of years, humans were dairy farmers who could not actually drink fresh milk. They just ate low-lactose cheese and yogurt. They relied on outside bacteria to digest the sugar for them. It was a brilliant cultural adaptation to a biological problem. But human biology was about to catch up in a spectacular way. Every time a biological cell divides, there is a chance for a tiny copying error, a genetic mutation. Most mutations do absolutely nothing. Some are harmful. But once in a very long while, a mutation happens that gives a human being a massive advantage. Sometime around 7,000 or 8,000 years ago, somewhere in Central Europe, a baby was born with a very specific genetic glitch. As this baby grew into a child, and then into an adult, the biological switch that was supposed to turn off the lactase enzyme simply stayed on. The gene was broken, but in the best possible way. This person, and eventually their children, continued to produce lactase their entire lives. We call this lactase persistence. Today we think of it as completely normal, but back then, this person was a rare genetic mutant. In times of plenty, this mutation did not really matter. If there was enough wheat and enough meat, being able to drink fresh cow milk was just a neat party trick. It did not give you a huge advantage over your neighbors. But human history is rarely times of plenty. History is full of disasters. Let us picture a specific moment in time. The year is roughly 5,000 years before the modern era. We are in a small farming village in Central Europe. Winter is approaching fast. The harvest this year was an absolute disaster. A late frost killed the early crops, and a summer drought withered the rest. The grain bins are almost empty. The people in the village are thin, tired, and scared. They know that when the snow falls, there will be nothing left to forage in the frozen forest. They have a herd of cattle, but the animals are also skinny. If they slaughter the cattle now, the meat will spoil before the end of winter, and they will have no animals left to breed in the spring. As the freezing winds begin to howl, the starvation sets in. Families are trying to stretch out their few handfuls of dry grain. People are dying of malnutrition. Diseases sweep through the weakened community. But there is one family in this village that is doing things differently. They carry that rare genetic mutation. They have lactase persistence. While their neighbors are rationing out dry seeds, this family is quietly milking their cows. They do not have to wait weeks to ferment it into cheese. They do not lose any calories in the processing. They just drink the fresh milk directly from the animal. It is rich in fat. It is packed with high-quality protein. It is full of calcium and vital nutrients. And most importantly, it provides clean, safe hydration. The local streams might be frozen solid or contaminated, but the cow is filtering water through its own body to make milk, while the rest of the village is slowly starving and suffering from severe sickness when they try to drink the fresh milk. This mutant family is thriving. The milk gives them the energy to stay warm. It keeps their immune systems strong. They survive the brutal winter, and when spring finally arrives, they are the ones who are healthy enough to have more children. They pass this lactase persistence gene to their sons and daughters. Over centuries, these periods of severe famine acted like a brutal evolutionary filter. If you could not digest milk, you were more likely to die during a bad winter. If you could digest milk, you survived and reproduced. It was natural selection working at incredible speed. A biological superpower forged in the freezing depths of starvation. This genetic advantage was incredibly powerful, but it took a specific group of people to spread it across the world. Fast forward to about 5,000 years ago to the vast grassy steppes of what is now Russia and Ukraine. Here lived a group of nomadic herders known as the Yamnaya. The Yamnaya were tough, mobile, and highly adaptable. They lived in an environment where farming was incredibly difficult, so they relied entirely on their herds of sheep, goats, and cattle. And crucially, they figured out how to ride horses. The Yamnaya also possessed this special genetic mutation, allowing them to digest fresh milk as adults. And this combination changed human history forever. Think about the incredible advantage they had. They were riding animals that allowed them to move vast distances quickly, and they were traveling with herds of cattle that provided a continuous mobile supply of nutrient-dense liquid food. They did not need to stop and plant crops. They carried their food and water supply with them in the udders of their animals. They were like an ancient army with an unstoppable, self-replenishing supply chain. The Yamnaya began to migrate. They expanded outward from the steppes in massive numbers. They moved west into Europe and east into Asia. As they moved, they encountered local farming populations. The Yamnaya brought their horses, their wheeled carts, their bronze weapons, and their milk-drinking genetics. Through interbreeding and conquest, the Yamnaya profoundly reshaped the genetic makeup of Europe. The lactase persistence gene swept across the continent like wildfire. In northern regions where sunlight is scarce, people struggled to produce enough vitamin D to absorb calcium naturally. For them, the milk gene was even more valuable. Fresh milk is packed with calcium and vitamin D. So in places like modern-day Sweden or Ireland, the ability to drink milk was such a massive survival advantage that today, over 90% of the native population carries the mutation. But this is not just a European story. What makes this piece of human history so incredibly fascinating is that nature solved the exact same problem multiple times in completely different parts of the world. While the people in Europe were surviving freezing winters by drinking cow milk, totally separate populations in Africa and the Middle East were facing their own brutal challenges. Imagine the harsh, arid environments of East Africa, the blazing sun, the endless dry seasons. Water is extremely scarce. Crops fail constantly due to drought. Here, cattle herding populations developed an intense reliance on their animals. In these dry environments, cattle are not just food. They are walking canteens of water and nutrients. Just like in Europe, being able to drink fresh milk in times of extreme drought was a matter of life and death. And just like in Europe, a genetic mutation appeared. But it was not the same exact genetic tweak. It was a different mutation on a different part of the DNA strand, but it achieved the exact same result. It kept the lactase enzyme turned on permanently. Evolutionary biologists call this convergent evolution. It is when totally different groups of people independently evolve the exact same biological superpower because the environmental pressure to survive is just that intense. Scientists have actually found at least 5 different genetic mutations for lactase persistence across human populations in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Every single one of them arose independently. Every single one of them was driven by the desperate need to extract calories and hydration from animals when the earth itself refused to provide. It shows just how powerful the partnership between humans and their livestock really became. We molded the animals through domestication, but the animals also literally changed our human DNA. When our ancestors managed to unlock the ability to digest fresh milk, they gained access to a complete nutritional package. Fresh milk contains fats for long-term energy. It contains carbohydrates for immediate energy. It is loaded with essential vitamins. For an ancient farmer clinging to survival, a steady supply of milk was the difference between raising healthy children and watching them succumb to disease. The energy provided by dairy helped fuel the rise of complex societies. It allowed humans to settle in harsh, unforgiving environments like the high mountains of Tibet or the cold, rocky coasts of Scandinavia. Places where farming alone would never be enough to sustain a large population. Without the ability to digest the milk of other animals, the map of human civilization would look entirely different today. It is strange to think about how deeply our modern bodies are shaped by the suffering and the ingenuity of our ancient ancestors. The next time you walk into a cafe and order a simple iced latte or pour a splash of milk into your morning cereal, take a second to really think about what is in your cup. You are not just drinking a common, everyday beverage. You are drinking the legacy of starving ancient farmers who made a desperate gamble on a strange liquid. You are benefiting from a random genetic glitch that saved human lives during the darkest, coldest winters of our history. They drank milk out of absolute, terrified necessity to survive a cruel world. You drink it because it tastes good with espresso,